Go.
Hello, you're welcome to this session. The last time we met, we started with light energy. So before we continue, let's recap what we did. We said that light is a form of energy that stimulates vision. In other words, without light, the eye cannot see. We also said that light has a dual nature. Light exists as a wave. At the same time, it also exists as a particle. And in this form, it is known as a photon. We also talked about the sources of light. We said we have two sources of light. One is the natural source, and then two is artificial source. Example of a natural source of light is a star or the sun, which is the biggest star in the Earth galaxy. An example of an artificial source of light is an electric bulb. And then torch light or flashlight. Today, we want to look at reflection of light. And we are going to look at two things about the reflection of light. The types of reflection and then the laws of reflection. So we move on to reflection of light. There are two types of reflection. One is reflection on a smooth surface, and then the other type happens on a rough surface. The type of reflection that happens on a smooth, shiny surface is known as regular reflection. It's also known as specular reflection. We have another type of reflection that occurs on a rough surface. That type of reflection is known as irregular reflection. And it's also known as diffuse reflection. So I want to look at how light is reflected on both of these surfaces. First, we look at regular reflection or reflection on a smooth, shiny surface. So if you look at the PowerPoint, this is how light rays behave when they strike a smooth, shiny surface. We realize that the rays are reflected in the same direction. So we realize that the light rays here are reflected in the same direction. So that is one of the properties of regular reflection. When it comes to irregular reflection or reflection on a rough surface, this is what happens. When the light rays strike on a rough surface, let's see what happens. We realize that the light rays are reflected in different directions. So we'll look at the difference between the two types of reflection. First, regular or specular reflection. We realize that the power rays are reflected in the same direction, as I've said before. and then the image formed is clearly defined. When it comes to irregular reflection or diffuse reflection, we realize that power rays are scattered in different directions, as we can see here. So we have one going this way, another one going this direction, and then another one moving in another direction. So power rays are scattered in different directions. And then two, the image formed is not clearly defined. So these are the differences between the two types of reflection. Now let's move on to the laws of reflection. Sorry for the interruption. We are looking at the laws of reflection. Before we move on to the laws of reflection, we will need to see this diagram of reflection. So in this diagram we have a reflecting surface. So for any reflection to occur, there has to be a reflecting surface. And here we assume that this is a smooth, shiny surface which will be able to reflect the light in its proper direction. So here we have an incident ray and then a reflected ray. So one ray that is coming in that strikes the reflecting surface, and then we have another ray that is reflected. We also have an imaginary line known as the normal, which is the line perpendicular to the reflecting surface. We have two angles which are very important. One is the angle of incidence and the other is the angle of reflection. So we have I degrees, and then the angle of reflection is represented by R degrees. So these are the labels for the diagram. So the incident ray, the ray that strikes the reflecting surface. Then we have the reflected ray, the ray that bounces off from the reflecting surface. We've already spoken about the normal. The I degrees, as we have already said, is the angle of incidence, and that's the angle between the normal and the incident ray. The angle of reflection is the angle between the normal and the reflected ray. So now let's move on to the laws of reflection. The first law of reflection states that the incident ray, the reflected ray, and the normal at the point of incidence all lie in the same plane. So when you come back to this diagram, this is the point of incidence. So we have the incident ray, the reflected ray, and the normal. So the law is saying that at the point of incidence, these two rays and the normal lie in the same plane. Now we move on to the next law of reflection. Law 2 states that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. So back to the diagram, it means I degrees is always equal to R degrees. So let's recap the laws of reflection. Law 1 states that the incident ray, the reflected ray, and the normal at the point of incidence all lie in the same plane. The second law also states that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. So these are the laws of reflection. We'll bring this session to a close at this point. But before that, let's have a recap of what we have learned today. We have learned that there are two types of reflection. We have the reflection on a smooth, shiny surface, which is known as regular or specular reflection. And then we have reflection on a rough surface, which is known as irregular or diffuse reflection. We have learned that under regular reflection, parallel rays are reflected in the same direction as against irregular reflection, where parallel rays are reflected in different directions. And then the image formed under regular reflection is clearly defined as compared to irregular reflection, where the image formed is not clearly defined. When we move on to the laws of reflection, first we look at the diagram of reflection, and we learned that for reflection to occur, there must be a reflecting surface. And assuming that particular type of reflection occurred on a smooth, shiny surface, then we are going to have an incident ray and a reflected ray. Then between those two rays, we have the normal, which is an imaginary line perpendicular to the reflecting surface. So we also have an angle between the normal and the reflected ray, which is known as the angle of reflection. And then we have an angle between the normal and the incident ray, which is known as the angle of incidence. So the laws of reflection state, the first law states that the incident ray, the reflected ray, and the normal at the point of incidence all lie on the same plane. We also learned that the second law of reflection states that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. So this brings us, at this point, we'll bring this session to an end. The PowerPoint material is available on the web. Make sure you download and go through before our next session. If you have any question, you can email it to me to gkmbia@hotmail.com. For better understanding, if you want a live session with me, you can also meet me on the internet. You can also meet me on the Internet StudyMate platform every Monday from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Bye for now.